Welcome back to the program. We are seeing global markets on the move, currencies fluctuating and commodities adjusting. Also, equities reacting to geopolitical shifts, and the US dollar has strengthened against the Eswatini lilangeni, while gold prices have dipped per ounce. Brent crude oil trading at $65.39 per barrel, reflecting recent volatility. Let's really understand what all these movements mean now with Bongani Mabuza, Head of Treasury from Nedbank. Eswatini Mshengu, good afternoon. Welcome to the program. It's been a minute.
Yeah, it's been a while. Good afternoon, Mguni. Good afternoon to your viewers. It's a pleasure to be here.
Happy to have you back on the program. Let's start by understanding the currency movements. Yep. We're seeing here the US dollar seeing a slight uptick against the lilangeni. What are some of the factors driving this currency movement, and how really it might affect Eswatini's strategies?
Yeah, that's quite topical right now. And what you actually find is that what's happening to the currencies has an influence on the rest of the markets,
right,
on commodities and as well as in equities.
Right.
So the big story around equities, currencies is really, one, the low inflation numbers that came out of the US, which then have a bearing on interest rate expectations, which then have a bearing on the pricing of assets in the US. But we've also seen a weakening of the dollar. The dollar was significantly weaker yesterday, and it's a bit steady today, but it's still off its highs quite a bit, and there's quite a few reasons for that. We've mentioned the lower than expected inflation numbers that came out, and there's also the markets shifting their focus back again to trade, and the outcomes of the trade engagements that are happening between the US and various countries. We saw some progress over the weekend between trade talks between the US and China, and there's expectations that the market is priced in, and President Trump has signaled that there are likely deals that are going to be announced between other countries that we can expect in the coming days. So that's basically what's moving markets right now.
You say these low inflation numbers from the US have a direct effect on all the other indices under your markets. I do want to understand, when we look at the gold prices, they have also dipped recently, but which 100%. Is interesting because it was a different conversation just I think a day ago. What are some of the underlying reasons for this particular decline?
Yeah, that's correct. So what you're seeing with the gold price is a slight dip this morning, but there was a gain in the gold price after the announcement of the US inflation numbers, and this is because the markets are expecting that interest rates are going to be low.
Sure.
And a low inflation generally signals low economic growth, and the expectation is then that investors are then running into protective assets, which gold is.
And then volatility with our oil markets today. The numbers will be up on the screen right now. I do have a few of the numbers on my phone here. And I want to understand these fluctuations, the implications that they may have for Eswatini's energy imports and inflationary pressures, if there will be any.
Yeah. So the oil price, I think, is one with significant consequences for ourselves as Eswatini. So oil had a 4-day rally, really. And that a main reason for that is because of the President Trump's rhetoric around supply from Iran, which is then signaling that there'll likely be lower supply into the global space if the US continues to sanction Iran, oil from Iran. That could have consequences for demand in the world. And if you see the oil price going up, that is naturally an inflationary event, which then has consequences for the price of goods, not just globally, but also in Eswatini. It is potentially inflationary if it persists, but if there is a solution in the near term to it, we'll likely not see that. But also we'll also remember that the oil price has been on a downward trajectory over the last couple of weeks. And that has been positive for inflation in Eswatini. I think we've also seen that we haven't had an adjustment in the fuel prices locally in quite some time. But the recent global events might change that.
I do want us to get into global market equity trends, but before we get into that, you speak of, numbers being inflationary and perhaps if there will be solutions in the near future. What do solutions look like? What should happen for us to realize solutions?
I think that depends on the specific issue that is inflationary. So, for instance, if we're talking about the inflation within the oil price,
yes,
that has a bearing on the prices of most goods and services in Eswatini. So, the solution therein is usually a monetary policy solution to arrest inflation, where the central bank may decide at its discretion to adjust interest rates in order to accommodate or to alleviate the trend of inflation.
It's interesting because I do know that people from the central bank are avid watchers of this show, and I hope right now someone is tuned in and they're making notes because we might need that should that happen. Let's get into the equity market trends. We are seeing modest gains, and I wonder how these could impact investor confidence as well as capital flows into emerging markets like ours here in the Kingdom.
Yeah, that's correct. And actually, we've seen modest gains across the indices that we track on this show. We saw the S&P 500 up almost a full percentage point, 0.75% yesterday. And the leader there really was the tech names. We saw Nvidia up more than 5%, and this is out of news that they'd be supplying Saudi Arabia with AI chips. I think it's 18,000 AI chips, and there's a further supply to the UAE of AI chips, potentially up to 1 million that's going that way. So that is obviously positive for in terms of demand for Nvidia chips. And you've seen the same, Nvidia and AMD were really the carriers of the indices, but you saw various equities indices rally yesterday. In the US, the FTSE was relatively flat, but closer to home within the JSE, I think the big story out of it was the Boxer results, which were out yesterday, and these are really the first results since Boxer went public on the JSE last year. So what we saw was that there was a slight decrease, in diluted headline earnings per share, but this is because of the dilution of the share price since the IPO.
I do realize that we have around 6 minutes left of talk time, and perhaps today, since we are done with what we normally talk about, we may want to get into, treasury strategies. And I know that, they are tracking what is happening, what is prevailing on the ground. And I wonder, given this current financial landscape, if you will, sort of indulge me here, what strategies that the Treasury is implementing to mitigate risks as well as ensure economic stability for Eswatini, or they should?
Yeah, thanks. And I think maybe I'll just, looking at your question, maybe I'll take a step back.
Right.
And I think it's quite topical, especially because of what's happening. You will know and appreciate that Eswatini is hosting its first investment conference.
Absolutely.
Tomorrow, which is the first of its kind for the country, and it's meant to showcase the capabilities of Eswatini as an investment destination.
Absolutely.
So we are aware that there's a number of investors, existing and potential investors, that are going to be there. So that is, and the country, through the various organizations within the country, from government going downwards, are going to be showcasing why Eswatini is open for business. And I think that is at the heart of driving economic growth, at the heart of alleviating economic challenges, is creating an environment that enables business to operate and to operate efficiently and effectively within the country. That is from a regulatory perspective, that is from an ease of doing business perspective. So I think that is, and I think the earlier interview was around the one-stop shop for businesses. So that is a step in the right direction, because it does ease the way in which business is done in Eswatini. So that is at the heart of enabling economic growth.
Absolutely.
And then the Treasury, in our case, being the Minister of Finance, also looks at a macro level what the country needs and to enable it to be effective and to be competitive globally. So I think we can then look to the budget speech that the Minister of Finance delivered in Feb, which speaks to various things, including the investment in education, which includes investment in infrastructure and building manufacturing capacity in the form of factory shells, etc. Investment in agriculture and stabilizing our healthcare system. So those are the building blocks that the government would have and would employ to enable an environment in which the economy grows.
Beautiful. Thank you, Bongani. It's a perfect parting shot because what he has just said, he has really endorsed everything that this show has been about. We started the program with our business one-stop shop, and then we looked at the investment conference itself, as well as the markets with Bongani. But he is just summarizing everything and is saying that this has come now more than ever, very necessary at an opportune time. Let's go for that break. We'll close the show very shortly.
Digital helps you make cross-border payments. Human gives you global specialists. Digital allows you to apply for a loan anytime, anywhere. Human connects you to credit experts. Digital puts you in control of your money, while Human connects you to wealth advisors. Digital allows you to freeze, unfreeze, cancel, and reorder your card. Human gives you that personal touch. Digital.